Hello students, welcome to Target IAS. This is a part of series of video lectures covering economy related current affairs targeting Prelims and Mains 2021. This particular video covers economy related current issues from September 12th to September 18th, 2020. Let's begin. This article tells about certain exemptions provided by the central government in relation to FCRA, which means Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. Now, what is FCRA? It is an act to consolidate the law and regulate the acceptance and utilization of foreign contributions. To put in simple words, any individuals or organizations that receive foreign contributions are regulated by this act. So, now what is this particular article is all about? Let us see some changes made in the FCRA, that is Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. They are: public sector employees are forbidden to receive foreign contributions, which means any individuals who are employed with the central or the state governments, they are called public sector employees, and they are not allowed to receive foreign contributions. Next, transfer of funds received under FCRA to other individuals or organizations prohibited. Quantum of administrative expenses are lowered, which means, let's say there is an organization which receives foreign contributions. Now, the amount of that foreign contributions used in administrative expenses are lowered from 50% to 20%. Next, providing Aadhaar number mandatory. Powers to suspend FCRA registration of NGOs for more than 180 days vested on the government. So it is upon the government to regulate the contributions of the NGOs. Renewal of registration after the 5-year tenure will involve same level of scrutiny as new applicants. Now, there is a system of renewal of registration after every 5 years. So, after completion of 5 years, that particular organization or individual that applied for renewal of foreign contributions will be treated as a new entity, and same scrutiny or severe scrutiny will be applied. And one more change is include designated FCRA account that has to be mandatorily created with State Bank of India. These are the recent changes that are made to the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. But now the article here specifically states that the Parliament of India has given the power to the Union government to exempt any individuals or organizations from the rules or regulations of this FCRA. And the exemption and the article also specifies that these exemptions will not be applicable to politicians or any candidates which are contesting in elections. Let me simplify you further. The article specifically states that the Parliament has vested the powers with the central or state governments, in which central government, which means the central government will have the power to exempt any individual from FCRA regulations. Now, using these powers, the central government in June 2011 exempted Prime Minister's National Relief Fund from FCRA regulations, and more recently in March 2020, Centre has exempted PM Cares Fund, which is Prime Minister Citizen Assistance and Relief in Emergency Situations Fund. Union government has also exempted this PM Cares Fund from FCRA rules, which means these two organizations or entities can receive foreign contributions without having to follow all the rules and regulations prescribed by the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. Now, apart from these, 6 other organizations, including Overseas Indian Development Foundation and Bharat Ke Veer, have also extended similar FCRA exemptions. Moving on to the next articles. Now, there are 3 entities involved in power distribution. The first entity is power generation companies, the second entity is transmission companies, and the third entity is distribution companies. The first being GenCos, which are power generating, and the power that is generated within the generation companies or GenCos will be transmitted through transmitted companies to DISCOMs, that is power distribution companies. These power distribution companies are mainly responsible for the distribution of power to all the consumers. Mostly these power DISCOMs come under the ambit of state governments, but there are certain private players involved in this power DISCOMs in certain metropolitan cities. But for the convenience here, we'll take power is mainly under the ambit of state government. Now, the central government had recently released certain draft rules or draft electricity rules 2020, which are mainly applied to these DISCOMs. Now, let us look at some of the rules prescribed under the draft electricity rules. Now, these draft rules are proposed with the main ambit or with the main aim to provide minimum standard of electricity distribution by the distribution companies. Now, it is upon the onus is upon the DISCOMs, that is distribution companies, to provide minimum standard service to all the consumers while providing electricity. Now, as a part of these rules, the DISCOM companies are to create a mobile app and an online web portal to receive any applications or any complaints regarding electricity services. Now, it will also be mandatory for the DISCOMs to display measures to access commonly sought services and to provide an online resolution for the same, which means the commonly sought services are to be displayed online in the web portal by the distribution companies, so that it will be easy for the customers to go through all the procedures and online. And they also need to provide a resolution to the complaints made by the customers online if possible. Now, these include procedures for grant of new connection, temporary connection, shifting of meter or service line, change of consumer category, enhancement of reduction of load, and others, which means the procedures are made easy for the customers to apply online for a new connection or a shift in the current connection, or temporarily shifting in the current connection, or shifting in the meter line, or any other problems related to the power distribution. So all these can be made or applied online by the consumers. Now, there is also one more provision given in these draft electricity rules. It is meter safety rules. According to this rule, if the meter is installed within the premises of the house, then the onus of the protection of the meter lies upon the individual or the house owner. Now, if the meter is installed outside the premises of the house, then it is the responsibility of the distribution companies to protect that meter. Now, the distribution companies or a DISCOM is supposed to replace a stolen or burnt meter within a period of 24 hours in urban areas and 72 hours in rural areas. Now, these rules also prescribed specified time limit in order to install a new connection in metropolitan cities, urban areas and rural areas. 5 days, 15 days and 30 days respectively, which means within 5 days new connection should be given to that applicant within 5 days in metropolitan cities, and within 15 days in urban areas, and within 30 days in rural areas. Now, there is also one more provision given in these draft electricity rules, which is a push towards renewable energy, which means if a customer wants to apply for a solar rooftop or renewable energy, then the entire process should be detailedly given to the consumer by the distribution companies by opening a mobile app or a online web portal. Now, this website will have to give all the details of procedure and documents required to adopt rooftop solar. Further, it will also have to enable online payment of fee to avail this service. Technical feasibility for setting up of rooftop solar projects will have to be completed within 20 days by the DISCOM. Which means if a consumer applied for a rooftop solar power installation, then the distribution companies or a DISCOM should respond to it and should install the rooftop solar power within 20 days from the date of application, and the online pay of fee installation should be made available within the web portal provided by the distribution companies. Now, coming to the next article, Singapore Convention on Mediation comes into force. Now, what is a mediation? Mediation is the involvement of a third and impartial party in order to resolve a dispute between two parties. Let's say there are two parties, A and B. They may be business entities or state governments or any two individuals. So, if there is a conflict of interest between these two parties, then a third and impartial party, with the use of specialized communication and resolution techniques, can resolve the conflict between these two parties. Then the process is called mediation. So, in order to resolve the conflict of interest between two business entities from two different countries, this particular convention is established. Now, this Singapore Convention on Mediation is also known as United Nations Convention on International Settlement Agreements resulting from mediation. This is also the first UN treaty to be named after Singapore, because Singapore had worked with the UN Commission on International Trade Law to bring this convention on mediation. Now, what will happen with this convention? Let's say there is a business entity A in India and which has business associations with a business entity B based in let's say US. Now, there is a conflict of interest or any dispute between these two business entities. Now, usually what will happen if there is a conflict of interest? These two or any business entity will have to make or draft a agreement or contract related to conflicts based on the domestic laws of that particular country. So, in order to bypass all these confusing and complex procedures, this convention on mediation is established. Now, with the help of this convention, India, let's say for suppose this company A has an issue with company B, then this company A can directly file a case in court in company B regarding to the problems associated with the company B. See, A is an Indian company and B is a US company. So, if Indian company has any problem or any conflict with the company B, then company A can directly file a case in court of US, which means A can directly file a court case with the US because both these countries are signatories to the Singapore Convention on Mediation. Now, this entire process is beneficial because it saves both time and legal costs, and a harmony is created while doing business with the countries based on with the companies based in other countries. Now, this also helps in boosting ease of business, ease of doing business rankings for India, and also cross-border disputes will come down with the help of the mediation by the third party. Now, as of September 1st, the convention has 53 signatories including India, China and the US. Moving on to the next article. According to this Moody's rating agency, the economic disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic will have a negative impact in delinquencies, loan delinquencies in MSME sector, and it will also impact asset-backed securities of firms. Now, what are loan delinquencies? Delinquency means defaulting a loan. So, according to this agency, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, there may be an increase in loan delinquencies, especially in MSME sector, that is micro, small and medium enterprises sector. Not only this, it also said that these firms may impact, or the disruption will impact firms' asset-based securities. Also ABS. These ABS or asset-based securities are pool of loans that are packaged and sold to investors in the form of securities. Now this entire process is called securitization. Let's say, for example, there is a bank. It doesn't have to be a regular financial institution, be any lender. Let's say there is a lender, for example a bank, and a customer took a loan of 100 rupees from that bank. Let's say there is a customer A that took 100 rupees loan from the bank, and let's say there is a customer B that took 200 rupees loan from the bank. Now this loan is a debt to the customer A. This 100 rupees is debt to A, but it is an asset to the bank. The same way, the B, for the customer B, this 200 rupees loan is debt to B, but it is an asset to the bank. Now what will a bank do under this asset-based securities? It will sell these loans to an investor. Now this investor will group or pack 2 or 3 loans. Let's say these loans from A, B, C and D in the rate of 100 rupees, 200 rupees, 300 rupees and 400 rupees. I am just taking an example here. This investor will pack or pool some loans and sell it in public market. Now when this A pays principal or interest, it will go through to investor, because he bought these loans, this investor bought these loans from the bank and released in the public market in the form of securities. So basically, loans from the consumers to any lender will be pooled and packaged by the investor and sell in the public market as securities. So the principal or interest paid by the consumers or customers will be the income or profit based on this asset-based securities. Now usually these asset-based securities involve auto loans or home equity loans, student loans, etc. According to this article, or according to this Moody's rate agencies, these asset-based securities may take a fall or negative impact because of the COVID-19 pandemic, especially in MSME sector. Now, it also forecast India's economy to contract 11.5% in the fiscal year ending March 2021. Now, moving on to the next article. The focal point of this article is urban employment, or rather urban unemployment. Now with the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw a contraction in many sectors, especially construction, trade, hotel and tourism. But the irony is, these are the sectors that create maximum new jobs to the economy. So during the pandemic, the shrinking of sectors or shrinking of these particular sectors, let's say construction, mining, hotels, manufacturing and trade. Now, the shrinking of these sectors resulted in increased unemployment. Now, in order to address this issue, central government had launched Garib Kalyan Rojgar Yojana with a corpus of 50,000 crores in order to increase employment in the rural setting. But the problem is this Rojgar Yojana is not sufficient to include all the unemployment in the country. Now, because the shrinking of these particular sectors, many people lost their jobs and many people did not get a job at the first place. So, there is a rise in unemployment and there is a decline in employment. Both these combined with reverse migration has led to increased unemployment in the country. Apart from increased unemployment, there is also another problem in the country within India, which is called vulnerable employment. Means inadequate earnings, low productivity and difficult conditions of work for the employees. That means no or low basic rights of workers. This vulnerable employment leads to poor quality of work for the workers. Now, according to ILO, that is International Labour Organization, of 535 million workers in India by the year 2019, 398.6 million have poor quality jobs. Now, this reflected in their daily wage earnings of less than rupees 198, which means the number of poor quality jobs in India is more when compared to the high quality jobs. Now, usually workers or capital or labor will move from low value added sectors to high value added sectors. But in India, workers or capital move from low value added sector to another low value added sector, which means even though there is a creation of jobs, all the jobs created are of poor quality. They're only shifting from one low quality sector to another low value added sector. Now that there is a contraction in Now that there is a contraction in economy, the increase in poor quality jobs is even more. So, even though the economy is increasing in recent years, I'm talking about the Indian situation, even though the Indian economy is improving in recent years, the quality of jobs or the poor quality of jobs is still remaining the same. So, there are two issues that are need to be addressed right now. Number one, the first issue is to create more number of jobs, and the second issue is the jobs created should not be vulnerable to poor quality conditions, which means the jobs created should be secured and provide decent wages to the workers. Now, in order to achieve that, there are certain steps that need to be taken by the government. Now, the first step is to increase the scale of urbanization. Which means the focus of urban employment generation programs should be in coordination with the local governments, and the local authorities should be given authority and some funds at their disposal in order to create urban local employment programs. Now, the second way or step that can be taken by the government is to design and implement intensive investment policies. These investment policies designed by both the government and private entrepreneurs should be in such a way that these policies should be labor intensive and they create more jobs in the urban setting. Now the third step that can be taken is to prioritize urban infrastructure. Urban infrastructure should be given priority in government policies so that urban employment may be improved. Now the fourth step that can be taken in order to improve urban employment is the immediate launch of urban employment schemes. These employment schemes can be to create These urban employment schemes can be focused or oriented towards building large scale medical, health and sanitation infrastructure. So there is an urgent need to create or launch an urban employment program. Now under that program they can plan to build, or these programs can be oriented towards large scale construction of medical, health or sanitation related infrastructure. Now with that kind of policies, not only urban employment will increase but also infrastructure in these social sectors will also improve. Now this article also states that even though there is a Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, that is MG-NREGA in rural setting, that may not be sufficient to include all the unemployed rural youth, because many of the rural youth leave their villages to city in order to find a better employment, because the wages under this NREGA may not be sufficient for their survival, or the wages under agriculture is not sufficient for their survival. So most of the rural youth are migrating to urban settings. So what really is happening is the income in agriculture sector is not sufficient. That is the first issue. And the second issue is the rising in urban unemployment. So the government should focus on expanding this NREGA to urban setting and also increase the number of wage days under MG-NREGA in order to improve the wages for the rural youth. So there has to be, or there should be an alternative NREGA program in urban setting in order to incorporate all the urban unemployed youth. Coming to the next article. This article discusses about foreign remittances by Indians abroad. Now, Indians sending their money to someone in abroad is called, the money sent by Indians to abroad is called remittances. Now, this comes under liberalized remittance scheme. Under this scheme, Indians can send $250,000 per year to abroad for medical treatment or student for studies or as a gift. So whatever the reason might be, any Indian can send or is allowed to send $250,000 per year to abroad. Now according to this article, Budget 2020 introduced something called TCS, that is tax collected at source, which means a tax of 5% is levied upon any amount that is above 7 lakh rupees that is sent to abroad. For example, I am going on a tour to Japan. I am carrying, let's say, 10 lakh rupees. The amount that exceeds 7 lakhs, that is the 3 lakhs, is charged at 5%. And this is collected by the traveling agency which I booked for myself. So let's say, for example, I am going through a traveling agency. Now that traveling agency will cut this TCS at the rate of 5% or for the amount that exceeds 7 lakh rupees. But if I'm traveling alone, which means if I book my tickets alone, then without the help help of any traveling agency, then that TCS is not applied to my expenses. The same way, if I am going abroad for a study purpose, the student loan, the tax applied on that student loan is only 0.5% under TCS, but not 5%. And one more thing here is, if PAN or Aadhaar is not provided to authorized dealer, then the TCS collected is 10%. So to put it shortly, the government had introduced something called TCS, which is tax collected at source to foreign remittances above 7 lakh rupees, be it for a medical emergency or be it for studies or as a gift or on tourism. The tax collected is 5%. If that particular individual did not provide PAN or Aadhaar details, then the tax collected at source is 10% instead of 5%. Now, if we go on a student visa, if the payment is made for educational purposes through student loans, then the TCS collected or cut is 0.5%. Like TDS, that is tax deducted at source, TCS can also be claimed through IT returns, which means, let's say for example, let's say there is a person A who already paid income tax, and after paying income tax, that person invested 10 lakh rupees in buying shares or bonds or securities in foreign country. Now the amount above 7 lakhs, that is 3 lakhs, is subjected to TCS with a rate of 5%. But because he already paid his income tax, he can claim this amount by filing IT returns. So the main aim of introducing this TCS is to prevent tax evasion from the country. Investors should not let TCS affect their foreign investments or studies abroad, because whatever the excess tax that is collected through TCS can be refunded and can be reclaimed by filing IT returns. Now, this article discusses the plight of revenue losses to sugarcane farmers. Now, in sugar industry, there are basically two major players involved: sugarcane farmers and mill owners. Now, sugarcane farmers sell their produce, that is sugarcane, to the mill owners, and mill owners process this sugarcane and sell sugar in the wholesale market. Now, the average cost of production for 1 kg of sugarcane is around 35 to 36 rupees. But in the market, 1 kg of sugar is being sold at 32.25 rupees, which means a loss of around 2.75 to 3.75 rupees per kg is happening because of the low minimum selling price of the sugarcane. Let me stress you here, MSP, that is minimum selling price. Now the center mandates that the minimum price in which sugar can be sold in the market is 31 rupees per kg. So because the mandate itself is low, that is 31 rupees per kg, sugarcane farmers and mill owners are accruing losses of around 3 rupees per kg of sugarcane or sugar sold. This ultimately leads to revenue losses to both the sugarcane farmers and mill owners, because around only 80 to 85% of cost of production by processing sugarcane is accruing through the selling of sugar. So mill owners will have to pay to this sugarcane owners over the period of 5 months per year. But mill owners will sell their sugar over a span of 15 to 18 months. Now, because there is a gap in the span of selling their produce, mill owners are not able to pay to the sugarcane farmers the whole amount, because the income earned by the mill owners itself is low because of the low minimum selling price mandated by the government. Not only that, and because sugarcane farmers are to be repaid within the span of 5 months, the amount cannot be collected. The sufficient amount that is to be paid to the farmers is not collected by the mill owners in that particular span of 5 months. Now, because of that reason also, mill owners are not able to pay to the sugarcane farmers the entire money. Now, the third reason why mill owners is not able to pay to the sugarcane owners the full amount is because the government delay in release of funds. There is a delay in release of funds by the government in order to support the sugarcane mill owners. This is also the reason why sugarcane farmers is not ultimately receiving the entire amount. Now, to summarize, I'll give you 3 reasons why sugarcane farmers is not able to get their revenues in time and in full. The first reason is the low minimum support price or the low minimum selling price that is mandated by the government, that is 31 rupees. And the second reason is the span or the amount of time in which the payments made to the sugarcane farmers and the mill owners is different, and the gap is not able to fill by the mill owners sufficiently because of low selling price of sugar in the market. And the third reason is delay in the release of funds by the government in order to support the sugar industry. So there is a demand by the mill owners to increase this minimum selling price of sugarcane from 31 rupees to 33 rupees. Now, according to this report, this would raise the value of some 12 million tons of unsold sugar stocks lying with the mills by 2,400 crores, and this will push the sugar prices up, and this will also help in repayment of dues to the sugarcane farmers. So the mismatch in cost of production and cost of selling and the mismatch in cash flows to both these entities will be solved to some extent if this minimum support or minimum selling price of sugarcane will be increased from 31 rupees to 33 rupees according to this article. Now, this video covers economy related current issues from 18th September till 24th September 2020. Let's begin. This particular article deals about certain rules prescribed by the Government of India regarding customs duties. Now, these rules, which are called CAROTAR, that is the Customs Administration of Rules of Origin under Trade Agreements Rule 2020. Now, the rules prescribed by the government is under this CAROTAR 2020. Now, according to these rules, any importers or any domestic companies which import products from abroad need to specify or need to certify the country of origin of that particular product. For example, there is a company A in India. It imports mobile phones from certain other country. Now, it is the duty of this company A to record or to specify the country of origin of that particular mobile phone. Now, why do we need to specify the country of origin? Because India may have certain trade agreements with other countries, or India may want to dump anti-dumping duty on certain products coming from certain countries in order to improve domestic market. Now, in order to address these issues, country of origin needs to be specified. I'll give you one more example. India has trade agreements with ASEAN countries like Thailand, Vietnam, Singapore, Indonesia. Now, India has trade, when I say India has trade agreements, when the products from that countries come to India, we give certain concessions in customs duties. So because of the cordial relations between these countries with India, India will give certain concessional duties, customs duties, or it won't collect custom duties altogether. So on the other hand, let's say China. India imposes anti-dumping duty on certain products coming from China, because those products coming from China are cheaper and it will affect domestic market. So because of that, India will impose, or India already imposed certain anti-dumping duties on that particular products coming from China. Let's say now India imposes anti-dumping duty on products coming from China. So what will China do? It will route its products through certain countries which have trade agreements with India. Let's say there is a company A in India which imports certain product. Let's say iron from China. Now, because India imposes anti-dumping duties on products coming from China, China may route this iron through other countries, let's say South Korea or Japan or any ASEAN countries which we have trade agreements with. So by routing its products through these countries, China may skip the anti-dumping duty, or China may avail customs duty concessions. So in order to prevent that, Government of India specified a rule saying that only when value addition is added to that particular product, it will be given concessional duty. Let me explain. Let's say, for example, India imports iron from China. Now, if China reroutes its iron from, let's say it reroutes its iron import through Thailand. Now, certain amount of value addition should be added to that particular iron when coming from Thailand. Otherwise, it won't get customs duty concessions. So, in order to address all these issues, Government of India specifically said that the country of origin must be specified by the importers, and the responsibility of that country of origin is laid upon the importing company that is based in India. Coming to the next article. I'm extremely sorry that this article is not visible to you, but I will give you the gist of this article. This article states that the economy of China, even though the pandemic, is rising on a steady account. Now, what is the reason behind this economic growth in China, even though the point of origin of this COVID-19 is China? Now, according to Chinese officials, it is because of a strategy called dual circulation. Now, what is this dual circulation strategy that is adopted by China? This includes both external circulation and internal circulation. Now, what is external circulation? Now, the dealings of Chinese companies or Chinese government with outside world, which means imports and exports. Now, if companies in China, let's say there are 2 or 3 companies in China, and the main business of these Chinese companies is based abroad, or these are exclusively export-based companies, then it comes under external circulation. So basically, external circulation is business dealings with outside world. Now, what is internal circulation? Now, internal circulation is when the business is or the demand is circulated within China. Then it is called internal circulation, which means these companies in China will target domestic consumers rather than foreign consumers. Then this idea is called internal circulation. Now, what did China do? China dependent majorly on internal circulation rather than external circulation in order to improve its economy. Now, we already know that there are trade disputes between US and China. So, China is well aware that its prospects of external growth or its prospects of exports is low because of its trade disruptions with US and certain other countries in the world. So, in order to compensate for the losses of these exports, China tapped its internal market. So, being the largest, one of the largest economies with largest population, what China did was to tap its internal market, to target its domestic consumers or customers. So, by doing so, it increased its production and it improved its economy. So, the main focus of Chinese economy increased internal circulation in addition with external circulation with some extent. These helped in improving Chinese economy, which is called dual circulation. Now, this dual circulation is also part of 14th five-year plan of China, which extended from 2021 to 2025. Moving on to the next article. Recently, we have observed that public sector banks has lost its customer base to private sector banks. Now, in order to address this issue or in order to address this cutthroat competition coming from the private sector banks, 12 public sector banks formed an alliance called Public Sector Alliance under Indian Banks Association. Now, this public sector alliance or this public sector bank alliance has come up with a strategy called Doorstep Initiative or Doorstep Banking. Now, these 12 public sector banks under this public sector alliance started this Doorstep Banking initiative. Under this initiative, at least 10 non-financial services are provided to the customers within their doorsteps. Now, let us look at the services that are provided by the Doorstep initiative. They are check draft, pay order, new checkbook requisition slip, 15G or 15H form, IT or GST challan, standing instruction request. Now, apart from this, there is another initiative called Feet on Street. Now, agents under this Feet on Street, they also deliver certain non-financial services like account statement, non-personalized checkbook, draft, pay order, term deposit receipt, acknowledgement, TDS or Form 16 certificates, prepaid instrument or gift cards. Now, these are the various services, mainly non-financial services provided by these public sector banks under this Doorstep Banking initiative. Now, these services or these non-financial services are provided by these initiative for now, but in future there is a plan to extend the deposits or withdrawal, that is financial services, through this Doorstep initiative. Now, who are the customer base that are targeted by this particular initiative? They are senior citizens, defense personnel, Central Reserve Police Force, widows, differently abled students, salaried employees, shopkeepers and street vendors. Now, these are the specifically targeted customer based by this initiative. Now, all the service requests generated by the PSB customers by mobile phone or app by 3 o'clock on that particular date will be rendered within 3 hours of the registration. For example, a customer using mobile app or a website requested for a service, non-financial service, by 12 o'clock in that particular day. Now, within 3 hours, that is by 3 o'clock, that particular service will be delivered to that customer. For example, if that customer have requested a service at 3 or 4 o'clock on that particular day, now that service will be rendered to him or that particular customer by 1 o'clock the next following day. Now, all these services are charged charged per 75 rupees plus GST per financial transaction. So the main aim of this particular initiative is to sustain or withstand the competition from the private sector banks. Coming to the next article. This article specifies that central government had amended public procurement norms or public procurement rules. Now, what is public procurement? Procurement is acquiring or buying certain products by the government. That's why it is called public procurement. Procurement by the public, that is government. Now, there are certain rules prescribed by the center while procuring products from the companies based in India. Now, according to these norms, companies are divided or classified into three main categories: class 1, class 2 and non-local suppliers. Now these class 1 companies are companies which have local content up to 50%. Let me explain. There is a company, let's say there is a company A. The products of this company or the value addition to the products of this company are locally, let's say they are locally availed up to 50% or more than 50%, then this company comes under A, which means most of the products or value addition made by the company will come from local industry, that is domestic industry. Now all this comes under class 1. Now class 2 companies are those companies which acquired their material or the value addition within the range of 20 to 50%. That is, let's say there is a company B which have this local content, minimum local content of 20%, anywhere between 20 to 50%, then these companies comes under class 2. Now, any companies which have local content of less than 20%, they come under non-local suppliers. So, there are basically three type of companies: class 1, class 2 and non-local. Now government usually prefer class 1 companies while making procurement. Now while making bids or tenders, class 1 companies are given preference when compared to class 2 or non-local suppliers. So the hierarchy goes like this: first preference will be to class 1 companies, then to class 2 companies, and there won't be any preference to non-local suppliers. So the rule that is mentioned in this article is any government ministry can increase the news mentioned in this article is, or the rule that is amended that is mentioned in this article is, the government ministry, whatever the government organization or ministry that is making a purchase, can increase this minimum local content from 50% to say 60% or 70%, that is based upon the interest of the government organization. So the government mentioned that it is up to the ministry or that government organization to increase the minimum local content from 50 and 20% to, let's say, 60 or 30%. Now there is also another rule prescribed in this particular article. Let's say there is a company X in India. This company X has foreign dealings, or it supplies its products to government abroad. Let's say if that particular country banned items or did not procure items from this company X, then companies from that particular country will also be banned by Government of India. Now let me explain by giving you a simple example. There is a company A in India, there is a company B in China. Let's say this company A provides raw materials or finished goods to Government of China for certain project. Let's say Government of China bans or did not procure goods from this particular A company, then Government of India said that any companies from China, let's say company B, it will also be banned by the Government of India from procuring any material. Now, this rule is only when dealings are made with the respective governments and not with private individuals. Now, these are all the rules that are mentioned in this particular article. Moving on to the next article, our ex-governor or ex-RBI governor Mr. Raghuram Rajan and ex-deputy RBI governor Mr. Viral Acharya jointly written a paper titled Indian Banks, A Time to Reform. Now, under this particular paper, they've raised certain issues regarding banking system in India. The first issue raised by these people is regarding bad banks. Now, according to this paper, bad banks is required. The concept of bad banks is required for growth or reforms in banking system. Now, we've already seen what the idea of bad bank is. Let me explain you again. A bad bank is any bank which buys NPAs, that is non-performing assets, from a public sector bank. Let's say a bank has NPAs in its balance sheet. In order to improve the balance sheet of that particular bank, this bad bank buys this NPA from the bank. Now, what will a bad bank do by buying NPA from the public sector bank? It will try and collect that amount from the customers. So, this bad bank will buy these NPAs at a concessional rate from public sector banks, and it will try to recover the whole amount regarding that NPA. So, it is a win-win situation to both bad bank and public sector bank. But there are certain issues involved here. By transferring NPAs from one public sector entity to another public sector entity, we are not solving the problem of NPA. We are just merely transferring NPA from one entity to another entity. We are not addressing the problem or the core problem of NPA. Besides, we don't know how this bad bank works or who will finance this bad bank. Let's say a public sector bank is heavily invested or heavily invests in this particular bad bank, there may arise an issue of conflict of interest. So this particular bad bank may favor that particular public sector bank which heavily invests in that bad bank. So in this paper, so these are all the issues that were discussed in this paper. So the another issue that is discussed in this paper is regarding DFS, that is Department of Financial Services. Now, what is this Department of Financial Service? This is a department under Finance Ministry. So, the main mandate of this Department of Financial Service is to regulate or oversee the banking operations. Sometimes government heavily invests in particular banks, thereby obtaining enormous power over that bank. So in order to address this issue or in order to remove this confusion, Mr. Raghuram Rajan had proposed to wind up or remove this Department of Financial Services altogether, thereby reducing the power of government over public sector banks. So the another point raised or mentioned in this article is privatization. Now this article or this paper heavily asked or proposed to privatize banks, thereby improving their efficiency and customer base. Also, when I say privatization, they specifically mentioned the word as reprivatization. Because in 1969, the government have already nationalized 16 banks. Also in 1980s, government nationalized certain banks. So we already nationalized certain private sector banks. So the point made by this ex-governor is to reprivatize the nationalized banks. Now this reprivatization will infuse with additional technology. Now this reprivatization will infuse banking system with financial expertise and technology, thereby improving customer base. These are all the mentions suggested by these two people in this paper, Indian Banks, A Time to Reform. Moving on to the next article. This article deals with privatization of railways. Now, the government had recently specified certain rules regarding privatization of railways. Now, according to these rules, government had removed the limit of number of clusters in which private entity can bid for or any private entity can invest in. Initially, the limit of the procurement by the private entity of these clusters was limited to 3, which means only 3 clusters can be bid by any private entity. But now that rule or that minimum limit is abandoned, and there is no limit of the number of clusters that can be obtained by the private bidder. So the entity winning the bid to operate that particular cluster will get rights to operate that cluster for a period of 35 years. I'll explain you by giving an example. Let's say there is a cluster or route from Delhi to Mumbai. Let's say a company A bid and won that cluster, that is from Delhi to Mumbai. Now, it is the sole property, that route is the sole property of that particular private entity, and that private player can run any number of trains between that particular cluster, and no other private entity can run in that particular Delhi to Mumbai cluster. However, government can run a train between the two particular clusters. Here in this example, Delhi and Mumbai. Let's say there's a company A which has its train operations from Delhi to Mumbai because it won the bid for that particular cluster. Now, in any other private entity is not allowed to run its train between Delhi and Mumbai, which has the starting point as Delhi and the ending point as Mumbai. However, as I said earlier, government can run a train between Delhi and Mumbai. But there is a catch. Even the government cannot start its train 1 hour prior to the private train or 1 hour later the private train has started. Let me simplify you further. Let's say this train A starts from Delhi at 5 o'clock in the morning. Even the government cannot start its train 1 hour prior, that is after 4 o'clock in the morning, or 1 hour later, that is till 6 o'clock, that is 1 hour later after the train left. This particular train A, which is of the private entity, let's say it starts from 5 in the morning, even government cannot operate its train between 4 and 6, that is 1 hour prior and 1 hour later. However, there are certain exemptions to this particular rule. Let's say a government train which have its operational capacity of more than 80% for the past 3 months, then this particular 1 hour before 1 hour after rule will not apply to that particular train. Let's say there is a train B which is run by the Government of India or Indian Railways. The operational capacity of that particular train B is more than 80% for the past 3 months. Then that particular train B can run between Delhi and Mumbai at 4:30 or 5:30, at even 5 o'clock. So that is the rule mentioned in this article. There is also another exemption. Let's say there is any special demand for trains. Let's say there is a public rally going on or any festival like Kumbh Mela. Now, in these certain situations where the demand for train is more, government or any other private entity can run trains between Delhi and Mumbai. Here Delhi and Mumbai, because I've taken that example earlier, can these another entities can run trains between Delhi and Mumbai at any time, but the time allocated is only 10 days. Now, in that particular route, that is from Delhi to Mumbai, which is awarded to private company A, can be used by the government or Indian Railways for the period of 10 days if any special demand arises. Now, apart from that, there are also certain rules mentioned in this article. That is, loco pilot, automotive loco pilot or train guard which run the train or which are associated with the operation of train they are supplied by the Indian Railways. So it is not up to the private company which won the bid in that particular cluster. So it is not up to them to employ these particular employees. So the crew including loco pilot, assistant loco pilot and guard required for operation of private trains will be provided by the railways. Now, the other rule mentioned in this particular article is the number of trains that is procured by the private company. Here in this example, let's say this private company A wants 10 trains to operate. Now, according to this rule prescribed by the Indian Railways, 3 trains can be imported by this company A from abroad, but the remaining 7 trains, now even while procuring locally, the minimum local content should be 50%. As I said earlier, class 1 companies which have minimum local content of 50%. So the rule mentioned here is that even though the rule mentioned here is that the 7 remaining trains which are procured locally by that particular company should make sure that that particular company or train is manufactured from a company which has minimum local content of 50%, which is a class 1 company. Now, apart from this, there are certain haulage charges specified by the government. Now, the haulage charges Now the ministry has set the base haulage charges at 512.31 per train kilometer for a 16 coach train. Now the base haulage charges will be revised annually to reflect the variation in the index for haulage. Regarding ticket fares, it is up to the private entity to decide on the ticket fares. According to the rule prescribed by the government, it is up to the train operator and they are free to decide the ticket fare based on the market conditions. However, station usage fee that is collected should be given to the Indian Railways by the private employers. So the last point that is mentioned in this article is the government will award the bid to that private entity which is willing to share maximum or highest revenue with the government or Indian Railways. Let's say there are 2 private entities that are bidding for the particular cluster. Let's say Delhi to Mumbai. Let's say company A is willing to share 10% of its gross revenue with the Indian Railways. Let's say a company B is willing to share 12% of its revenue with the Indian Railways. Then the government or Indian Railways will favor company B over company A because company B is willing to share highest revenue of its gross revenue with the Indian Railways. These are all the rules that is mentioned recently by the government of India regarding privatization of railways. Moving on to the next article. Now the whole idea of electricity is based on 3 stages, that is generation, transmission and distribution. Now the generation of electricity or power and transmission of power is mainly under central government. So these both areas come under the ambit of central government, but the distribution of power mainly comes under state government. Generation and transmission, they are central government subjects with occasional private players in generation. However, now the area of distribution comes under the ambit of state government. However, there are certain private players involved in this power distribution in certain cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Agra and Ahmedabad. Other than these particular cities, no private players are involved in power distribution. Only recently, under Atmanirbhar Bharat, government had specified that distribution companies in union territories can be privatized. Now, only union territories but not states. This was the rule mentioned recently by the government under Atmanirbhar Bharat. But now, in this article, this article specifies that government is allowing state governments to privatize their distribution companies. So, earlier, UTs were allowed to privatize, but now states also are allowed to privatize their distribution companies. Now, but the stake of privatization is entirely up to the state government to decide. It is from a range of 0 to 26%. Now, between the range of 0 to 26%, it is up to the state government to decide the stake of private players in the distribution companies. Now, why did government now suddenly want to privatize distribution companies? It is because of the losses these companies are facing in recent days. Since the state-owned discoms have been financially and operationally beleaguered for 2 decades now. So, in order to address all these issues, government has decided to privatize distribution companies, and it is up to the state government to decide the range of stake of private players in these distribution companies. Before ending this article, all these rules are prescribed under a document called SBD, that is Standard Bidding Document. Now, the standard bidding document has specified all these rules that determines the privatization of discoms. Moving on to the next article. Cess. What is a cess? Cess is additional tax levied by the government on certain areas or certain products or certain services, so that the proceeds of the cess is allocated to specified objectives. Let's say government of India has started a project. In order to fund the project, government may decide to levy an additional cess on certain products. So the cess that is collected from that products is routed or targeted to spend on that particular objective. For example, Swachh Bharat cess. Now, government decided to impose Swachh Bharat cess on certain taxable services. So, the cess collected will be specifically used for the purpose of Swachh Bharat, and the funds collected under Swachh Bharat cess will not be used for any other purpose other than Swachh Bharat. All the cess collected by the government of India, let's say Krishi Kalyan cess or Swachh Bharat cess or GST compensation cess, all the cess that is collected by the government of India, so be it GST compensation cess or Swachh Bharat cess or road and infrastructure cess or Krishi Kalyan cess, whatever the cess that is collected by the India will be put under Consolidated Fund of India, that is CFI. Now, from Consolidated Fund of India, these funds are later pooled under designated or specified fund, be it any cess, Krishi Kalyan cess or road and infrastructure cess, any social welfare surcharge, Swachh Bharat cess or GST compensation cess. There are many cess that are levied by the government of India. Now, all these cess will be first allocated to or first pooled under Consolidated Fund of India, so CFI, that is Consolidated Fund of India, and later regrouped under specified reserve funds. So, let's say 1 lakh crore rupees is collected under Swachh Bharat cess. Now, this Swachh Bharat cess that is collected initially will be sent to consolidated fund of India, and later that 1 lakh crore fund which is collected under Swachh Bharat cess will be kept under a special reserve fund for Swachh Bharat cess, and it will not be mixed up with any other project or any other cess. So the news under this article is around 2.7 lakh crore rupees that is collected in the form of various cess is still under Consolidated Fund of India, and it is not allocated to the specified reserve fund. Now, according to the CAG report, that is Comptroller and Auditor General report that is mentioned in this article, whatever the cess that is collected in the year 2018 and 19, that is this particular 2.75 lakh crore, is still under Consolidated Fund of India, and it is not allocated to specified reserve fund. Now this is problematic, or this is an issue, because the entire process of allocating, collecting and pooling of this cess is made through parliamentary approval. Now even after that, CAG had reported that government had still not allocated specified funds to the specified reserve funds, but it is still under Consolidated Fund of India, and that is a very problematic situation considering the entire process of cess collection and taxation comes with parliamentary approval. So these are all the points that is mentioned in this particular article. This particular video covers economy related current issues from 25th September till 30th September 2020. Let's begin. Very recently, RBI has proposed certain guidelines for current account depositors. Now, what is a current account? There are two types of accounts in banks: savings account and current account. Now, in savings account, there are certain rules, like we can only make certain amount of transactions and there is limit to the amount of transactions. But in current account, there is no such limit, which means any number of transactions can be made on a daily basis, and there is no limit to the amount of transaction made by the customer. Usually companies and business peoples resort to current account, which means any business will maintain a current account in a bank. But the drawback here is, because money is not being withheld for certain amount of period in the bank account, there is no interest earned with respect to current account. So like in savings accounts, unlike in savings account, there is no interest earned to the money deposited in the current account. Now that we know that there is what a current account is, let us go into the details. Very recently, in August 2020, RBI has issued certain guidelines regarding these current account depositors or customers. Now the first guideline released by the RBI is that RBI urged banks not to provide a facility to open new current accounts to those customers who have availed cash credit and overdraft facilities. So the first guideline is no new current account for customers who have availed cash credit or overdraft facilities. Now, what is a cash credit facility? It is simply, cash credit means short-term loan provided by the bank. Let's say there is 500 rupees in the account of in a current account. Using cash credit, customers can withdraw the entire amount without maintaining minimum balance. So I'm repeating this again. In current accounts, there is a clause that minimum amount of balance should be maintained at all times. But by availing this cash credit facility, the customer can draw the entire amount in the bank without maintaining the minimum balance. So that is cash credit facility. Now, what is overdraft facility? Overdraft is something when a customer withdraws amount that is not there in the bank. Let's say there is only 1000 rupees. I'm just taking a figurative amount here. Let's say there is only 10,000 rupees in the current account of a customer. Now, using overdraft facility, customer can withdraw amount 15,000 or 20,000. That is the limit which extends the amount present in the current account. This is called overdraft facility. Now, both these cash credit and overdraft facilities are provided by the banks to the customers having current account. Now, RBI said that no new customer current account can be provided by the bank who have used this cash credit or overdraft facilities. Now, what is the second guideline released by the RBI? RBI said that when the let's say when a customer have a banking exposure of 50 crores, then a escrow mechanism should be put in place. Let's say a customer has around 50 crores of credit loan in that particular bank, then an escrow mechanism should be put in place. If a customer has 50 crores of banking exposure, then escrow mechanism have to be deployed. Now, what is an escrow mechanism? Escrow mechanism is simply meaning bringing a third party. Let's say there are two customers, A and B. Now, let's say A is selling his land to B. Now, in order to maintain mutual trust, they will bring in a trusted third party. So, let's say this A is selling his land to B for an amount of 1 lakh rupee. Now, what will B do? B deposits 1 lakh rupee in the account of escrow party, that is third party. Now, only after verification of correct documentation, the money will be transferred to A. So, escrow mechanism is bringing a third party to boost confidence between the two involving parties, that is here in this case A and B. So, RBI urged the banks to bring in an escrow mechanism if a customer crossed the limit of 50 crores. Now, what is the third guideline released by the RBI? RBI said that banking exposure limit has to be maintained up to 10%, which means banks can give 10% of their advances to customers availing current account. Now, recently the current news mentioned in this article is CII, that is Confederation of Indian Industry, has urged RBI to revise these guidelines. Now, it asked the RBI to extend this as a limit of banking exposure from 50 crores to 100 crores. So, this body, the CII, asked RBI to increase the limit or threshold from 50 crores to 100 crores given the impact of MSMEs and to ensure minimal impact on the banking sector. Similarly, CII asked to decrease this banking exposure limit from 10% to 5% for clients availing cash credit or overdraft facility, or it asked the RBI to make changes such that limits are consistent with 15% of Tier 1 capital base. So, instead of 10% of banking exposure limit, CII asked RBI to reduce the limit from 10% to 5% so that banks can reach wider consortium, which means banks can lend to more customers, or more banks can collaborate and give loans to a particular customer. So, these are all the issues mentioned in this article. Moving on to the next article. RBI recently released certain guidelines to enhance cyber security in urban cooperative banks. So these guidelines are released in a document called the Technology Vision for Cyber Security for Urban Cooperative Banks 2020-2023. So this is the name of the document in which RBI released certain guidelines to improve cyber security for urban cooperative banks. Now, as a part of the guidelines, it plans to achieve its objective through a 5-pillared strategic approach called GUARD. G stands for governance oversight, U stands for utile technology investment, A stands for appropriate regulation and supervision, R stands for robust collaboration, and the D stands for developing necessary IT skills. So using all these pillars, RBI hoped that cyber security in urban cooperative banks can be increased. Now, by maintaining or by following all these pillars, UCBs can be able to better manage and secure IT assets, implement an off-site supervisory mechanism framework for UCBs on cyber security related controls. Also, the UCBs or urban cooperative banks can develop or share best practices and discuss practical issues and challenges and implement a framework for providing awareness or training for all the UCBs, that is urban cooperative banks. So all these can be achieved by following these guidelines provided by the RBI in this document. So it basically aims for increasing cyber security or to develop new IT skills in urban cooperative banks, and all these urban cooperative banks come on a platform and discuss practical issues or any new developments. So basically, by following all these guidelines prescribed by the RBI, urban cooperative banks can increase its workability by improving its IT skills and by discussing practical ideas and practical issues. They can increase awareness among urban cooperative banks, thereby enhancing cyber security. Moving on to the next article. Before going into the details of the article, let me explain you a concept called investment advisors. Investment advisors, also called stockbrokers, are a person or a group that make recommendations regarding investments. Also, they can manage the assets of the clients. So basically, investment advisors have two duties. One, they can advise clients on how to manage their assets. Let's say a client approached an investment advisor, he can advise regarding where to invest his money or where to invest his assets. Now he can do that advisory function, but there is also another function to the investment advisor. They can directly distribute the assets of the client themselves. Now all these functions will be done by the investment advisor for a fee. SEBI has recently released certain guidelines regarding investment advisors. Let us look into those guidelines. Now, the first guideline prescribed by the SEBI is to segregate the functions of investment advisors into advisory and distributory. So, advisory actions and distribution activities should be properly segregated by the investment advisors. Now, investment advisors, if they have certain assets with them, they can be registered under Securities and Exchange Commission, thereby calling them as registered investment advisor. So here SEBI mentioned in its second guideline that if investment advisors, if IAs have at least 150 clients with them, then they should be registered as a non-individual investment advisor. So I'm repeating this point here again. if an investment advisor have more than 150 clients, then that investment advisor should be registered as non-individual investment advisor. Now, the third guideline released by the RBI is regarding the fees collected by the investment advisor. So basically, there are two modes in which investment advisors can collect their fee. First is fixed fee and the second is assets under advice. Fixed fee and the second mode of collecting fees is assets under advice, also called AUA. Now, under fixed fee, an amount of 1.25 lakh rupees can be collected per client per annum. Now, under assets under advice, 2.5% of AUA per annum per client can be collected. Now, let me explain you this point again. There are two modes in which an investment advisor can collect his fee from his clients. Now, the first mode is fixed fee. That means a maximum of 1.25 lakh rupees can be collected by the investment advisor per client per annum. So the fees cannot exceed 1.25 lakh rupees. Now, under the second mode, that is assets under advice, he can collect 2.5% of the asset. Here, let's say if if investment advisor distributed client's assets worth 1 lakh rupees, or he provided advice regarding 1 lakh rupees of worth of asset. Now 2.5% of that 1 lakh can be collected by the IA from the client. Let's say, for example, if investment advisor advised to the client regarding assets worth 10,000 rupees, then only 2.5% of 10,000 can be collected by the IA under this AUA mode, that is assets under advice mode. So these are all the guidelines prescribed by the SEBI regarding investment advisors. Moving on to the next article. Before going into the details of this article, let me provide you the backstory regarding Vodafone case. In 2007, Vodafone bought assets from Hutchinson Whampoa. Now, Hutchinson Whampoa was based in India back in 2000s. So, Vodafone bought mobile assets from Hutchinson in 2007. Here, let me explain you something. Let me explain you by taking an example here. Let's say there are two persons, A and B. A has a land worth 1 lakh rupees. Now, after a certain period of time, let's say this A sold his land to B at a price of 3 lakh rupees. Now, the difference between 3 lakhs and 1 lakh is 2 lakh rupees. It is profit for A. So, by selling 1 lakh rupees worth of land at 3 lakh rupees, 2 lakh rupees of profit was gained by A. So, this 2 lakh rupees in terms of Indian taxation is called capital gains. Now, Indian government can levy a tax on this capital gains called capital gains tax. Now, there is another concept here which is called withholding tax. Now, under withholding tax, government will not levy this tax on person A who sold the land, but the tax will be levied upon person B who bought the land. Now, what this B should have done is, now B bought land from A at a price of 3 lakh rupees. Let's say the interest that is to be paid to the government is 50,000 rupees. Now, B should only give 2.5 lakh rupees to A, thereby giving remaining 50,000 as interest to the, or as a tax to the government of India. Now this 50,000 rupees paid by B is called withholding tax. Now coming back to our Vodafone example, in 2007 Vodafone bought mobile assets from Hutchinson Whampoa. Now what the government of India did is it asked, or it levied the withholding tax on Vodafone. So basically government of India's version was Vodafone should have withheld the tax that is to be paid to the government of India before transferring money to the Hutchinson company. So because of this withholding tax, Vodafone appealed to the Bombay High Court. Now Bombay High Court ruled in the favor of government of India. Now because of unfavorable decision, Vodafone appealed to the Supreme Court of India in 2012. Now Supreme Court of India ruled in favor of Vodafone. Now the argument provided by the Supreme Court of India was government of India cannot levy ambiguous tax now because those provisions are not provided in Income Tax Act 1961. So what the government of India did was it amended Income Tax Act 1961 and added something called retrospective taxation. Now we've already discussed the concept of retrospective taxation, but for the sake of convenience I'm explaining you here again. Retrospective taxation is a type of tax that is levied upon customers from a past date of transaction. Let's say this particular rule or amendment came into force in September 2020. Now the government using this clause can levy a tax upon a transaction that was made in April 2020, that is before the date of commencement of this particular taxation rule. So by introducing this clause, this retrospective taxation, government of India asked Vodafone to pay certain amount which amounted to $3.9 billion to government of India under retrospective taxation amendment. Not happy with what was happening, Vodafone appealed in the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which is present at Hague. Now in 2014, Vodafone went to Permanent Court of Arbitration. Now the news here is International Tribunal or Permanent Court of Arbitration ruled in favor of Vodafone. It said that by imposing this retrospective taxation, India has violated bilateral investment treaty it had with Netherlands. Now, what is bilateral investment treaty? Let's say when a foreign company invests in India, it expects a hassle-free environment. Now, if Indian government keeps on imposing taxes to these foreign companies, then they will not be able to function properly. So, in order to address these issues, both the involved countries, here in this case India and Netherlands, they will sign a mutual treaty, that is bilateral investment treaty, in order to prevent any further tax impositions on that particular company from that particular country. So because India has this bilateral investment treaty with Netherlands, Permanent Court of Arbitration said that India cannot impose these taxes on Vodafone, thereby ruling in favor of Vodafone. Now, Permanent Court of Arbitration also asked India to pay certain amount to Vodafone in order to cover the costs or losses made by the Vodafone all these years. So now this ruling brings to an end one of the most controversial disputes in India, that is between India and Vodafone. But not only this, there are many other disputes like this with India. For example, Kane Energy. Now, the argument made in this article is India cannot keep on imposing taxes like this, thereby creating hassles to the foreign companies that are willing to make investments in India. All these tax impositions will severely affect ease of doing business ranking for India, thereby procuring additional losses to India. Now, moving on to the next article, IRDAI, that is Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India, has listed 3 public sector insurance companies as domestic systemically important insurers. Now, those 3 companies are LIC, GIC and New India. LIC is a Life Insurance Corporation, GIC is General Insurance Corporation and the New India Assurance Co. These are all the 3 public sector insurance companies which are termed as DSIIS, which means Domestic Systemically Important Insurers. Now, what is systemically important insurance? These are those companies which have huge market size and they have operations both domestic and global markets, and they have high interconnectedness. So because of all these because of all these factors, these companies are so huge or so important that any disruption or loss to these companies will affect Indian economy as a whole. So these companies will be listed as systemically important insurers, thereby these companies are subjected to more stricter regulations. So they are expected to maintain high levels of corporate governance. Now these SIIs are too big and too important that huge expectations from the government itself will increase the risk of default for the insurance companies. So because of that high level of importance, additional or stricter regulatory because of that high level of importance, additional or stricter regulatory measures are to be applied to these particular SIIs or systemically important insurance. Now, there are certain factors based on which an insurance company can be designated as systemically important insurance company. Now, the first factor is size in terms of total revenue. And the second factor is the value of assets under management. Now, these are the 2 important factors based on which an insurance company is can be called or listed as systemically important insurance company. So, size in terms of total revenue, including premium underwritten and the value of assets under management. Now, this insurance regulatory authority will on a timely basis change or include more insurance companies under this SIIs, but very recently only these 3 companies or these 3 public insurance companies are listed as systemically important insurers. Now, according to the provisions given by the GST Council, central government is supposed to provide GST compensation to states for a certain amount of period. We have already discussed this issue in one of the previous videos. Now, according to the central government, now because of the COVID condition, because of the COVID impact, the collections from the GST is low and the central government was not able to compensate the GST compensation loss to the states. So the reason given by the government is there are 2 factors affecting this GST collections. The first factor is the genuine reduced collections of GST. So GST loss, the reasons given by the central government for the GST loss are 2. The first reason is reduced GST collections. And the second reason given by the central government is because of COVID pandemic or act of God. Now, government had recently introduced this clause of act of God and included this COVID-19 pandemic under act of God. So basically the version of central government is not only reduced GST collections, affected the total amount, but also COVID-19 affected loss is also there. So basically center said that central government, so according to the version of central government, the responsibility of central government is to only compensate the losses made because of reduced collections and not because of act of God. So central government gave states two options. The first option is to borrow under a special window from RBI, and the second option is to borrow the entire amount from the market. But when states borrow the entire amount from the market, the interest should have to be paid by the states and not by the government. This entire issue we have discussed in the previous in the previous video already. So let's say the amount of GST loss due to reduced GST collections is X rupees, and the amount loss because of act of God is Y rupees. The two options presented by the government is states can borrow X rupees from RBI under special window, or states can borrow X plus Y rupees from market. Here, when states borrow X rupees, both the principal and interest will be paid by the central government eventually, but when X plus Y is borrowed from the market by the states, then only principal will be given by the central government, but the interest should be borne by the states themselves. So most of the states opted for this first option and they borrowed from RBI under special window. However, there are certain states which opposed both the options. There are states like Kerala, West Bengal, Telangana and Chhattisgarh. Now there are some other states also. Now these states are opposed to both the ideas and they want to bring in dispute resolution mechanism. Now there are certain clauses under GST Council. The type or the goods and services that come under the ambit of GST or the goods and services that does not come under the ambit of GST will be decided by the GST Council. Now the tax rates or tax slabs is also decided by the GST Council. Now if there is any clash or dispute between central government and the state governments regarding any of these goods and services or tax or slab rates or issuance or distribution of GST compensation funds between central and states, then GST Council said that a dispute resolutionary mechanism can be put in forth and the dispute can be resolved. So far, this dispute resolution mechanism has not been activated, but now these certain states who are not happy with the options provided by the central government wants to use or utilize this dispute resolution mechanism mentioned in the Constitution. Moving on to the next article. This article deals with the concept called ESG. Now, E stands for environmental impact, S stands for social responsibility, and G stands for corporate governance. Now, this concept of ESG is new to India. Usually, when investors want to invest in a company, they will see if that particular company is following these ESG rules properly. Let's say there is an investor A who wants to invest in mutual funds in particular company B. Now, A will find out whether company B is following these particular ESG protocol or not. Let's say there's an investor A wants to invest in mutual funds in a company B. Now, investor A will find out whether company B is following ESG protocol. He will check if that company B is rating high on ESG funds or ESG protocol. Now, only after verifying, he will be able or he will be happy to invest his mutual funds in that particular company. So basically, ESG funds or ESG investing is sustainable investing or socially responsible investing. Now that investors are more and more aware, now that investors are more and more aware of their environment, they will see if companies rate high on ESG protocol or not. Now, such funds that are invested in those companies which rate high on ESG are called ESG funds. Right now, there are 3 schemes in India that follow ESG funding. The first scheme is called SBI Magnum Equity ESG. The second scheme is called Axis ESG. And the third is called Quantum India ESG. So these all 3 schemes worth 4,500 crore is being all these 3 schemes worth 4,500 crore are currently being managed in India. Now, what change can it bring? How is ESG useful? It will alert companies to be more socially responsible and more environmentally responsible. Say, if company wants to draw funds from the public, it has to maintain these 3 parameters so that investors will be happy to invest in that particular company. Now, there are certain companies which will lose out because of this ESG parameters. For example, tobacco industry or coal-based sectors, or any company that will generate hazardous waste and is not managing that particular waste properly. Let's say a company use lot of water and resources without proper recycling or reusing facilities. Let's say there is a company which releases these effluent waste into soil, water or air, thereby polluting all this environment. All these companies are at a loss because investors are keenly observing if companies are adhering to ESG protocols. That is, if companies are more environmentally responsible or socially responsible, all these factors matters now. So, because of this ESG funds, companies will have to be more aware, so that they have to make sure that they are ranking higher on these ESG parameters. Moving on to the next article. Now, under LAF, that is Liquidity Adjustment Facility, there are certain provisions provided by the RBI. There is repo rate, there is reverse repo rate, and there is marginal standing facility. We all know what reverse repo rate is. Repo rate is the interest rate at which banks are borrowing. Repo rate is an interest rate that banks borrow from RBI. Now, reverse repo rate is when RBI pays interest to banks because of some withholding of certain government securities or bonds. That is reverse repo rate. Now, what is marginal standing facility? Let's say a bank needs an overnight funds. Now, if that bank is not in a position to borrow from another bank for overnight purposes, then bank will resort to borrowing from RBI. Now, the interest rate charged by the RBI when banks want to borrow for that overnight facility is called MSF, or marginal standing facility. Now, how do we determine how much amount can be given to the bank by the RBI? It is based on NDTL, that is net demand and time liabilities. So around 2% of NDTL can be borrowed by the banks from RBI under this MSF window. Now, how do we determine the interest charges under MSF? That is determined by the RBI itself. Let's say repo rate is let's say repo rate is 4%. Now RBI can decide MSF or marginal standing facility will be 25 basis points or 50 basis points higher than the repo rate. Now in this case MSF will be 4.25%. Let's say in future repo rate is increased to 5%, then automatically MSF will also be increased to 5.25% or 5.50%, that is determined by the RBI. Now the news here is RBI has extended the borrowing limit under this MSF facility from 2% of NDTL to 3% of NDTL. So because of this increase in the limit at which banks can borrow from RBI, around 1.49 lakh crores of funds are accessible by the banks which can borrow under MSF facility. And the another point here is these borrowings under MSF can come under high liquidity assets under LCR, that is liquidity coverage ratio. Now what is LCR? Liquidity coverage ratio is the ratio or the amount of highly liquid funds present with the bank to meet short-term obligations. Let's say for a period of 30 days or to maintain its daily activities for a period of 30 days, banks need, let's say, 1 lakh crore rupees, then the amount of so LCR basically means the highly liquid assets present with the bank to meet its short-term requirements for a period of 30 days. Now these funds borrowed under this MSF facility can be regarded as highly liquid assets that can be shown under LCR, that is liquidity coverage. Let me tell you one more last point under this MSF facility. The banks can borrow funds from RBI under this MSF facility by pledging only government securities or bonds. So it cannot pledge any other assets with the RBI to borrow under MSF facility, but it can only avail this facility by pledging SLR, that is statutory liquidity ratio, that is the gold or government securities that are maintained with the bank. Only by pledging these government securities or either bonds by the government can these banks avail MSF from the RBI. With this article, I'm winding up today's video. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please like, share and subscribe to our channel Target IAS. This is Dr. Spurti signing off. Thank you. Happy studying.